Hello, folks. Welcome. Good morning if you're watching this live, and good whatever it is if you're watching this later on. Hope you're having a fantastic day. I want to start with my regular preamble and make sure that you can all see and hear me okay. So do me a favor and drop a comment there in the, comment section. Alma, good morning. And I know we have Nicole with us as well. Can you see and hear me all right? Let me know if I'm coming through all right there. In the meantime, I want to go ahead and introduce today's topic for this week. Good. Sounds like, all right, looks great. Shalise, welcome. Looks like I'm coming through loud and clear, she says, so we are going to go ahead and get started. We, in fact, have a very short lecture today, not because the topic is not important, but because what I want to do is I want to divide it into two pieces. Today, we are just going to define kind of the tools of protectionism. We're going to define protectionism and then talk about the tools that countries use to practice protectionism. And then in our next lecture on Thursday, we're going to go into detail around why countries do this and the rationale behind it, because in fact protectionism is bad. So if it's bad, obviously there are reasons why you want to do it, which we'll talk about on Thursday. If it's bad, why do we do it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about Thursday. So today's relatively short. We're just going to define the tools of protectionism, and then we'll get into the details in our next lecture. So with that, wrong button. Let's come on over here. Remember, we talked about free trade, right? Free trade is the unencumbered, and I'm going to go ahead and get my little highlighter there, unencumbered flow of goods and services across borders. In other words, no trade barriers. All right, we can trade freely. That is free trade, and we also understand the promise of free trade. I put promise in air quotes because, yes, there's a lot of benefits to free trade, massive benefits. I'm a fan. But we also know, as we discussed in our previous lectures, that it comes at a serious cost, and sometimes not paying attention to that cost is a horrible moral, ethical, and legal oversight. So we need, or transgression. So we need to really pay attention to the costs of free trade and globalization. Nevertheless, this is what we shoot for the most part, is free trade, meaning no trade barriers. Well, there are trade barriers. There are a lot of trade barriers. There are so many trade barriers. And I really hope, I have a new puppy, by the way, who I'm actually leaving him out of his crate for this particular lecture, and he has decided to come into my office and eat my furniture during that time. So we'll see how long this lasts. At the end of the lecture, I'll introduce you to him. I hope you're listening to the podcasts and the reports and reading the things that I'm providing you, because one of the things that really makes clear, especially in the podcast about the Santa suit, is the trade barriers are incredible. There's so many of them. We'll go into detail on that on Thursday, but I really hope you're following the supplemental material that I'm providing you in addition to these lectures. Okay, so let's go on and look at this. First of all, a very common trade barrier, which is what that particular podcast about the Santa suits is all about, is the tariff. Okay? A tariff is basically a tax levied on imports or exports. It's a tax. It's really, really simple. Now, different sides of the political aisle will try to persuade you that it's not what it is and so on and so forth, but it's really quite simple. The idea is if you're going to bring that product into this country, we're going to tax that product. Okay, so it's a form of protectionism. We're protecting our own industry. So let's say Santa suits for a moment. All right, well, now if you import in some crap Santa suits, we don't care about that. We're going to put that at a lower tariff. But if you bring in some really nice stuff that takes some serious skill and sort of, craftsmanship to make, we're going to put that at a higher tariff because we want to protect our own industry. So, all right, who pays the tax? Well, the conservative side will tell you, oh, well, the importer pays the tax. Whoever produced it and is importing it in is paying the tax. Well, how do they pay it? Well, they pay it by increasing the price. So the consumer pays the tax. Now, I should rewind. It was unfair for me to say the conservatives. I will say the current administration, because the conservative camp actually is very, very clear about what a tariff is. They have a good, strong understanding. The current administration will try to tell you that this is not costing American consumers anything, that the importers will eat the cost. No, they don't eat the cost. All right, it just increases the cost. Now, we're fine with this as a tariff because we don't want you to buy the import. We want you to buy the domestic product. So we, in fact, do want the producers to increase the cost to the consumer. So I'll give you an example. This is actually a video. We're not going to watch the video as we're on a video, but it talks about the tariffs that we put on Chinese steel. Now, during this video, and this is an old video, we'll look at newer material on Thursday. But during this one, they talked about a 600% tariff on Chinese steel, meaning if you buy $100 worth of steel from the U.S., it'll cost you $100. If you buy $100 worth of steel from China, it'll cost you $700. So why would you buy Chinese steel at $700 when you can get in the U.S. steel from $100? Why indeed? This is why it's protectionism. We are protecting our steel manufacturers. Now, on Thursday, we're going to talk about why we would do that, okay? And why we would protect versus open up free trade. There's a lot of really good reasons why we do this. But this is what a tariff is. Now, of course, for quite a while, the trade wars were front news with China. That was before the COVID outbreak this year. So back in 2019, the trade wars with China were all the rage. They were all the news. For a variety of reasons, again, that comes Thursday. But one of the big tools we used in that trade war was tariffs. Okay, what else? Well, then we've got subsidies. Subsidies, in a way, is kind of like the opposite of a tariff. It's where a country says, hey, listen, we're going to give you money to actually produce this thing. That way, when you sell it, you can sell it for a lot less because we have subsidized it. Now, this is one of the reasons that China is able to sell steel so inexpensively, because China subsidizes their steel industry. So whereas it would cost us $100 to make something, it would cost them only $20 because they're subsidized. And therefore they have an unfair trade advantage. More about that on Thursday. But the idea of a subsidy is when a country props up an industry. Now, we subsidize a ton. All right, we subsidize a ton. We subsidize things like agriculture, telecommunications, oil, gas, pipelines. Well, why do we subsidize these things? Well, We subsidize agriculture because we want everybody to have affordable access to food. If you notice, the price of bread, the price of milk, never really changes that much. It's always pretty consistent. Why is that? Why is it not, beholden to market fluctuations? Because the government subsidizes these things to make sure that the prices stay pretty steady. Daniela says, according to one of our readings, subsidy is one of the reasons why we have low income and high income countries. Yes. Okay. That's, I'm going to give that. Referencing the reading is referencing a lecture. I like that. I'm sorry, I'm constantly looking at my puppy, freaking out. What's he getting into, right? Great example, right? Countries who can afford to subsidize their companies get ahead economically, whereas countries that cannot afford to subsidize their industries, they're constantly behind. So that's actually a really good catch, Daniela. The US is a very rich country. We're really rich, and so we can subsidize a lot. China's really rich. They can subsidize a lot. Okay? But then this gives unfair trade advantage. Now, telecommunications, we want everybody to have access to communication. Power, we want everybody to have access to power. And so these are things that we subsidize for our people. And not every country can do that. Okay, so we have tariffs and we have subsidies. By the way, US, here are some of the things that we subsidize. Airlines, semiconductors, engines, motors, energy. Now, by the way, do you remember when we talked about comparative advantage? What are things that the US has a comparative advantage in? Oh, things like airlines, semiconductors, big engines, heavy engines, pharmaceuticals, and so forth. In other words, we subsidize quite often the industries in which we have a comparative advantage to really make sure we keep a lock on those things. Okay, so yeah, kind of interesting. All right. We also have import quotas. Another form of protectionism is when we say, okay, you can go ahead and import that in, but you can only import in so much. Once you meet a quota, we're going to cut off the imports. So you can't import an infinite amount of this stuff. Interesting. This is from U.S. Customers and Border Protection. This talks about our U.S. import quotas. I don't know if you can see this, but the top one, brooms. Brooms. Wash basins, other brooms. Brooms. The number one thing that we have an import quota on in this country is brooms. This is a great example of how archaic and sort of Byzantine a lot of these protection programs are. I have no doubt that the reason we protect brooms is because, some broom lobby convinced congressman or woman to include brooms on a list, and they just worked it into a bill and nobody paid any attention. And lo and behold, brooms are a protected commodity. We're going to talk more about this later on. But it is just amazing to see the sort of things in this commodity subject to import quotas that are out there. You can actually go out to this website and take a look at it. The things that are listed there, you're like, what in the world? It's nuts. But import quotas are a way that we protect our own industries. All right? Then we have local content requirements. This is simply, well, here, I'll just read this. The Buy American Act requires government agencies to give products in which 51% or greater of the material by value is produced domestically. Here's the idea. The world, not the world, might be the world. I don't know about the world, but the country's largest consumer of things is the government. Well, now, if you're going to have a government who produces, who buys a whole bunch of stuff, and you want to protect your own economy, then you say, hey, dear government, who buys a ton of stuff, you need to make sure that everything you buy is at least 51% produced by value in the United States. So that way, United States producers have a built-in customer who is a huge buyer for their goods and services. So this is yet another form of protectionism. So later on, when we talk about this Thursday, you know, whenever you ask the question, why does it cost so much for the government to buy this stuff? Well, because they can't buy based on what is the best price. They cannot shop for price. They have to shop for where do they have contracts, where is it made in the USA, what political things is it taking care of, so on and so forth. And so just about the last thing the government's going to look at is price. All right. So, as I said, very short lecture. I want to make sure that you have a good understanding of the definitions of these sort of protectionist techniques, tools, right? When we come back on Thursday, what we're going to do is talk about specific examples of where we use these tools, how we use them, why we use them, when it's a good idea to use them, and when it may not be such a good idea to use them. So, Daniela, I know that you've done the reading. That's great. I really want to encourage all of you to do the reading and to watch and listen to the supplemental material and come with some examples and so forth, because we're going to get into the weeds. And trust me, protectionism really does get weedy. We're going to get into the weeds in the next lecture. So with that, let me ask if there are any questions or any clarification I can offer for this particular short lecture. If not, then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and wrap things up, but I will stay online in case you want to ask any questions in our comments or anything like that. Okay? So thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you all on Thursday. Have a great day. Yes, don't you get to meet the puppy, Shalise? You're right. Okay, let me go get the puppy. Bosco! Bosco, they want to meet you. Bosco, where'd you go? There you are. Oh, right. They want to meet you. Everybody, this is Bosco. And yes, he's a Frenchie, a French bulldog. He's technically my son's dog. Long story there, long story about how we brought a dog into our family. We had another dog a while back. And he's about 9 to 10 weeks old. So, yes. Say hi, Bosco. So, yeah, there he is, the little troublemaker. Oh my gosh. Thanks for reminding me, Shalise. All right, we'll see you all later.